I want to bring in Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and a Fox News contributor. Ambassador, good to see you.
Glad to be with you.
Okay, I got to ask your take on Rahm Emanuel's stance. I mean, there he is at Trump Tower yesterday meeting with Donald Trump. How could he dig in and say Chicago is going to continue to be a sanctuary city? I mean, can you explain this to us, how even sanctuary cities operate when we know that the law is the law? I mean, he's just basically saying we're going to break the law.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of people who thought the Titanic was unsinkable even when their feet were getting wet, and there's just no explaining it. I think it's an issue that the American people have carefully considered. I think their position is much closer to Donald Trump, and all I can say is if there are those like Mayor Emanuel who want to continue to adhere to the position he espouses, good luck and God bless them. They're going to lose.
Taya?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is always a good idea to give power back to the states and the cities and see how it works. Like we were talking about earlier, it's a more pure experiment of what actually works. The only thing I would caution people is that, like the guns in Chicago, they'll say, well, yeah, you know, Chicago has all these tight gun laws and the crime is going through the roof and their gun crime is through the roof, right? And they'll just say it's because Indiana has loose gun laws, not because their gun laws aren't working. So they'll blame it probably on something else outside of them. But if we can stay focused on looking at them as an experiment to see how it works, I think it's good.
Ambassador Bolton, you know, who would you like to see at the State Department?
Well, you know,
let's take your name off the list for just a second so you can be more objective.
Yeah, well, you know, as I've said before, I'm very old school on this subject. I just don't think it's worth discussing. I think, in fact, that public discussion does tend to inhibit the president-elect's flexibility, and I just think that's bad for the decision-making process. So you can have my name, rank, and serial number, and that's about it.
Okay.
Well, what about the inauguration approaching, Ambassador? I mean, famed producer Mark Burnett reportedly has suggested a helicopter ride for President-elect Trump, coming as filmmaker Michael Moore says, look, he's calling on all protesters to just disrupt the inauguration. This is what he tweeted yesterday. Disrupt the inauguration, says Michael Moore. The majority have spoken by nearly 2.7 million votes and counting. Silence is not an option. What are you expecting on Inauguration Day, Ambassador?
Well, I hope it doesn't materialize. Look, this is the route to being a banana republic, and I think the people, by and large, are extremely frustrated with the way government does not perform. And they ought to allow the normal functions of government to proceed, and disrupting the inauguration is not one of them. People want to know why we've lost civility in American politics. Look at Michael Moore. There's your answer.
Ambassador, it's Dagan McDowell. But I listen to these people calling for, like Michael Moore and the like, who are wildly upset about the election of Donald Trump. Well, where were they during the actual election cycle? Where were they in terms of getting their votes out? And now that the people have spoken in terms of Donald Trump's election, now they're not satisfied with it.
Yeah, well, you know, they had their opportunity. It didn't work out for them, and at some point you have to accept the results of the election and move on. But, you know, if that's what they want to do, again, as with Rahm Emanuel, the more outrageous their behavior, the more unreasonable, I think the greater the public reaction against it. I think it puts their position ultimately in greater political jeopardy, which is just fine with me.
So how would you characterize the team that he's putting together so far?
Well, I think it's outstanding, and I think the pace of the transition is equal to or ahead of other transitions in recent years. I think one of the reasons you're getting some of these reactions is that it's a delayed understanding that actually Trump won the election. And so when they see the unfolding of it and what it means when you take over the executive branch of government and hold the Senate and hold the House, the realization sinks in, and the upset level goes up. But I think that's just going to have to be something they get used to, and I think the first 100 days is going to be a very, very active period for when he's then President Trump.
So he's nominating Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt to head the EPA. He's tapped General John Kelly for Homeland Security and WWE co-founder Linda McMahon to spearhead the Small Business Administration. What do you think these choices say about Trump's leadership style? A lot of debate around the EPA pick.
Well, I think it means he's going to carry through on his promises that he made to the voters and that resulted in his election. I know Scott Pruitt. I think he'd be an outstanding administrator of EPA. And it really demonstrates, I think, a problem in Washington that I certainly saw in my own case at the UN. There are a lot of people in the Democratic Party who think that the head of the EPA should be somebody who favors a bigger EPA and more environmental regulations. It's a kind of ratchet effect. Once something happens, you can never roll it back. And if you disagree in any particular with the situation you inherit, that somehow you're not qualified. That's fundamentally wrong. This agency is out of control and has been for 8 years or more. So he's going to roll it back. It is not, in my view, a legitimate basis for a senator to vote against Scott Pruitt because they disagree with him. I don't think that's what the framers of the Constitution intended the Senate's role to be. That's not what the Senate's role was for almost all of our history. They should look at competence. They should look at moral turpitude. These are disqualifying factors. Disagreeing with the nominee is not a reason to vote against him.
Ambassador, let's drill in a little bit on the campaign promises issue, because do you think that Trump is making a mistake by walking back a little bit on his position with the Dreamer Act? Or do you think that he's striking a reasonable compromise between what maybe some of his more right-wing campaign supporters might have wanted and Rahm Emanuel on the extreme left? Do you think he's walking a good line, or do you think he's making a mistake by pulling back on some of the Dreamer issues?
Well, I'm not sure we know enough about how this is going to play out. There's a lot on the table here. You can't do everything at once. That is a reality. And I'd have to say, I think fundamentally what Americans, what really sets them off is less the particulars about admission to the United States and more about the question of Americanization. I think people recognize the strength of our society as people from all over the world have come here and been made Americans. And under Obama, I think the tendency was to go in the other direction. It was symbolized not by Obama, ironically, but by Al Gore, who once talked about our wonderful national motto, E pluribus unum, out of one, many. Now, he obviously didn't do well in 8th grade Latin because the motto means out of many, one. That has been the secret of success for America, and I think if we give up on Americanization, that's the real problem.
Wow.
How do you, but Ambassador Bolton, how do you turn the ship, so to speak? Because the country is headed in one direction. How do you turn it without legislating that, without basically force of law?
Well, I think the President-elect has made it very clear he's got a big stack of executive orders he's going to revoke on day one, and I think this is the peril of the Obama approach. I've got my pen and phone, and I'm going to do what I want. That lasts right up until a new president comes in and takes them all off the table. Yeah. There is going to be some legislation required, and I think the issue looking forward is with majorities in both houses of Congress, how much you can get through. And if the Democrats choose to be obstructionist, which is entirely possible, then you take it to the country in 2018.